Tonight, Tony McNulty, Home Office Minister, Boris Johnson, Conservative Higher Education spokesman, Shirley Williams for the Liberal Democrats, from the United States, the author and critic Christopher Hitchens, and his brother, the broadcaster and columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens. So welcome to the programme. The panel, of course, don't know what's going to be put to them by the audience here, but just our first question is from Robin Horsley, please. Robin Horsley.
Is Salman Rushdie's knighthood an insult to Muslims worldwide?
Shirley Williams.
I think it was a mistake. I think that if it was, as it's said to be, a reward for lifelong literary endeavour, then all I can say is that I think the timing was very odd indeed. I want to say very clearly that I don't believe the Prime Minister had anything whatsoever to do with it. I think it came up from a departmental proposal, which is what usually happens with knighthoods, and that a lot of the political sort of firestorm that started has been started quite incorrectly. Nevertheless, I think the Department of Culture and the media, which I think put his name forward, were not very wise to do it in that way. This is a man who has deeply offended Muslims in a very powerful way, who's been protected by the British police against threats of suicide for years and years, at great expense to the taxpayer. And frankly, I think that it was not wise and not very clever to give him a knighthood.
Christopher Hitchens.
I think that's a contemptible statement, and I think everyone who applauded it should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves. Do you think, really, that it's a waste of time and money defending free expression from suicide murderers? If you do, can you think of a better cause the money should go on? When I hear idle talk about how this country and this culture could or should punch above its weight, as we say, I think, well, what do we have that's better than our language? And isn't it extraordinary that we have an author who has helped spark a renaissance of writing in the subcontinent that's produced a whole new branch of English literature there, written in our language, who knows it better than, I may say, some of our politicians appear to do. Tariq Ramadan, who you may have heard of, who's become something of a self-appointed spokesman for Islam in Western Europe, had the following to say the other day, a man with whom I've often disagreed. He said, it is entirely up to the British who they nominate for an award. I hope you'll at least agree with that. Oh, you don't? All right. He went on to say something perhaps you don't know. He said the protests against it in Pakistan are purely a matter of violent, vicious internal politics there. It's part of a jostling for position. People who claim to be offended can by all means do so. It takes a lot to make me cry. But people who say, I'm so offended I'm going to start suicide bombing in my country, have to be told, no, that's an unpardonable interference in our internal affairs. And it shouldn't have been our High Commissioner who was called in by the Pakistani government to be lectured. We should have hauled in the envoy of Pakistan here and said, stop that right now, or do without all the aid we give you. Okay. Do without the protection and alliance that you've prospered from out of our kindness and generosity. Okay. We won't have talk of murder for the writing of novels. And I see that whatever I say, there's a sort of sullen, resentful, boring atmosphere in this room.
I don't think so.
Thank you.
If you stop,
that's better.
You have to stop in order to get the applause, Christopher. That's the thing.
No. Normally I'm just interrupted by storms.
Peter Hitchens.
Aren't we getting this a little bit out of proportion? Is an award of a knighthood by the British state a particularly major event? And are these demonstrations... I don't think it's very likely I'm going to get one, Boris. I'd say it doesn't seem to me to be... And I have to say, the whole array of honours available from the British state seems to me to be almost wholly devalued. And the only ones which we issue, which I still take seriously, are those which are awarded for gallantry and courage.
All right, let's come to the question, is the knighthood an insult to Muslims?
Of course it's not an insult. A knighthood is not an insult. And of course it is outrageous that anyone suggests that anyone should be killed for holding an opinion or offending a religion.
That's better.
I just would add that there's another thing we have out of proportion here. If the cameras...
Shirley Williams forgot to say. I can't believe I'm sitting here.
Oh, don't be silly,
She
Christopher.
forgot to say
you
that.
know perfectly well
No,
that
come
I
on,
wouldn't.
come
I
on,
would
you
not
turned your
support
guns- you turned
suicide.
your ire on Salman
I haven't.
Rushdie.
You distorted almost everything I said, and I never suggested and would never believe that people should be committed to being killed because of something they say or what their opinion
High
is.
time you said
Of course,
that.
I don't believe
High time
that.
you said
But
that,
I
madam.
would dedicate against that.
But you do think that it was wrong to offer him the
I
knighthood?
think I said very precisely that I thought the timing was unfortunate because it was a thing to be recognised as a lifelong contribution to literature, and I think, frankly, that Christopher has completely twisted what I said, and I resent that very much.
No, I mentioned what you didn't say.
I resent that very much.
Boris Johnson.
Well, I mean, in point of fact, I object to this knighthood on purely literary grounds. I have struggled. In the panel, David, I don't know how far you've got through one of Salman Rushdie's works, but they are more or less impenetrable. And I think I can think of plenty of great English authors, John le Carré, Martin Amis, why not, who wrote a great novel in the 1980s called Money, a fantastic book. Dick Francis, has he got a knighthood yet? He's got a far better grasp of pace, character, plot, in my view, than Rushdie, and he hasn't got a knighthood. I think I object on literary grounds, but I defend completely the decision of the Honours Committee, obviously fairly batty, but it's their right to do it, and I defend the honour completely against the charge of insensitivity. It's completely a matter for the Honours Committee. Obviously, they're very, very eccentric people. They gave an award to some pants merchant who sent it back in protest. It should not be a matter. We should not have our distribution of honours controlled by and affected by considerations of how it will go down amongst the mullahs in Tehran. That is completely wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? It's completely wrong.
The man in the centre there at the back.
I have read Midnight's Children, and it's a first-rate novel, in fact. And the Booker Prize judges agree with me, so I think he deserves a knighthood.
Oh, well, there you go. Good.
Midnight's Children.
I haven't got through it.
Tony McNulty.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on.
The last point is precisely where we should be arguing about this. I agree with Boris, but one way or the other, it's judgment on literary, whether the panel got on literary grounds, whether the panel got it right or not. I profoundly disagree with Shirley. This is not an insult to Muslims. It is not a mistake, and it is up, she's right, to various honours committees to do it. It doesn't come from the Cabinet or the Prime Minister. So if there's a debate to be had, let's have it on the relative merits of his literature and not on whether it offends. I find that as facile a debate as The Life of Brian, Jerry Springer and all these other elements that go to, yes, maybe offending people. To be perfectly frank, anything, every time I watch television, I may well be offended by things, but I don't run out with a bomb strapped to me, and I don't run out to burn a book or go to burn the studio. We must get this in proportion.
Could I
Just one thing, if that's true, why did Margaret Beckett sort of apologise for it and say she hoped it hadn't upset people?
Well, she did the weasel thing of saying, I'm sorry if anyone is offended, which is a bit weaselly.
But she's perfectly entitled to say if people are offended, then she's apologising for the offence. She's not apologising for the notion that something the Honours Committee has done was quite deliberately done to cause offence.
But now, the Midnight's Children did not just win the Booker, and Salman did not just later win the Booker of Bookers. Midnight's Children won the main literary award in Iran. People tend to forget. When the fatwa was issued against him by a senile, theocratic dictator who'd run his own country into beggary and bankruptcy and misery, every Arab and Muslim writer worth the name, from Najib Mahfouz, the Egyptian Nobel Prize winner, to Adonis, the great poet of the Palestinians, all signed and wrote in a book for Salman saying, we identify our cause with you and with your struggle for free expression in our culture. If you say that Muslims are being offended by this, and you lump them all together, you immediately grant that they are in fact represented by the most extreme, homicidal, fanatical, illiterate, intolerant people who not only haven't read this book, but couldn't read it.
Okay.
And that's an insult to Islam.
The woman in blue there, then I come...
It's an insult to Islam.
The woman in blue there.
It was said earlier to cut off aid to Pakistanis if people suicide bombing. Isn't that a little hypocritical? Because the vast majority don't actually want to go out and bomb people. That's spiting the rest of them, surely.
No, that was Christopher Hitchens' point. but he's said quite a lot. So have the gentleman here...
Well, you didn't ask me on to keep quiet, did you?
No, I didn't.
My question would be, was there any intention by the Honours Committee in nominating this to deliver an insult? And it seemed to me quite clearly there wasn't. They were going on literary merit, and I would have to say that I was absolutely thrilled when I saw that he was given this award, because I agree with our panellist here that he's a fantastic author and he deserved it.
Peter Hitchens, do you think there was anything deliberately political about the decision to award him the knighthood?
No, there doesn't seem to have been. But I would just like to make the point, also the supposed fuss in Pakistan seems to me to be completely artificial. Is there somewhere in Lahore or Islamabad a shop which sells Union Jacks for people to burn? If you actually pulled the camera back from most of these scenes of people supposedly dancing in rage about Salman Rushdie's book, you would find there were a dozen people there. This thing is wholly manufactured at both ends.
All right.
And I don't think you can obtain, by the way, literary merit by being attacked by the Ayatollah Khomeini. It's not a guarantee of it.
There is a difference between this episode and when the fatwa was first issued in, I think, 1989. And it's very, very noticeable that this time, actually, you're starting to see some Muslim voices in this country raised in support of free speech and saying, come on, take it easy, it's only a novel, relax. And that's, I think, a wonderful development. And we should focus on that and not on these bigots.
It's only a knighthood, not it's only a novel. Shirley Williams.
Well, I do think that what I said has been totally exaggerated.
Well, you keep saying that. Get over it.
You talked a great deal, Christopher.
Right,
Would you like giving me just
Shirley
a
Williams,
moment?
go on.
Because you had a really long stretch
Shirley.
of this.
Yes. No,
and what I want to say was, what I pointed out was that I thought the timing was not fortunate, and I also think that we have to take account of the fact that many, many moderate Muslims, if you want an example, several of our Muslim MPs who are clearly moderate and share a belief in democracy and freedom of speech and all the rest of it, thought that this was an unfortunate thing to do at this time because it looked so much as if it was a slap in the face.
I've not heard any of the four Muslim MPs.
Lord Ahmed, for a start,
he's not an MP.
Well,
you said the MPs.
No, I
none of the
believe
four
also
MPs.
Mr. Malik, but Mr. Lord Ahmed, who spoke for them, was quite precise.
The preposterous figure of Lord Ahmed is calling for Muslims to go on strike in this country.
Somebody finish a remark before you all come sliding back in again. It's like living in a fox hunt. Let me be absolutely clear. This is what I said, and you've got to recognise that for many, many Muslims, the satanic verses were seen as blasphemy. Now, we've stopped in this country believing in blasphemy, but there are many, many moderate Muslims, not an invented group of Pakistanis, who found what was said in satanic verses to be profoundly offensive to them because they actually do believe very much, indeed, in God as Allah, and I think one has to take that into account.
And therefore he shouldn't have been given a knighthood.
I don't think he should have been given an knighthood right now. No, I don't.
Okay.
But the point that
some other time.
The point that the state should somehow respond to a piece of art or literature that is blasphemous. That's where the equation falls down. But that's where many of those
we're talking about
who criticised in the early. In the late 80s.
All right, I want to take one more point, then we must go on, because we've already taken a quarter of an hour on this. You, sir, at the back there.
I'd just like to ask Boris if, judging by his literary taste expressed earlier, he'd prefer to be giving another title to Geoffrey Archer.
No, but I think I've got a better idea. He's already... George... What about George MacDonald Fraser, the author of the Flashman novels? I mean, it's disgraceful. Why hasn't he been honoured?
All right, we go on.
Knighthood for George MacDonald Fraser.
All right. Yes. Let's go on to another question. Trevor Hayward, please.
In light of the Iraq War, is it possible for Tony Blair to be an effective Middle East envoy?
This is the story which seems to be getting considerable support, that Tony Blair is going to be appointed as a Middle East envoy. Peter Hitchens, do you think in light of the Iraq War it's possible for him to be effective?
I can't see how. I think the idea has obviously emerged from a White House in the final spinning cycle of its time in existence. They don't anymore have any real connection with reality, and they don't anymore have any understanding of what it is that they have done or what is going to happen. I can't imagine that he would be so foolish as to accept this, which seems to me to be an extension of the Yo Blair moment, which we all witnessed on television some months ago, a request to our former Prime Minister to be the servant of a discredited President of the United States. I'm amazed that anyone has ever been able to take Mr. Blair seriously, either as a domestic or an international figure, and I really do think the time has come, now that we have stopped having to pay him, that we should stop even pretending to take him seriously at this or anything else.
Okay. Christopher Hitchens.
I'm a very great admirer of the Prime Minister, and I really regret that he seems to have talked himself out of a job that he was doing very well. It was in 1999 when George Bush was an unknown and unaware governor of Texas that Tony Blair made an excellent speech in Chicago saying that though we might have settled accounts with Slobodan Milosevic, long overdue, there was an even more overdue appointment waiting for us in Baghdad with Saddam Hussein, whose regime and whose rule was completely incompatible with international law and with any concept of civilization. It was his idea, not Mr. Bush's. It's absurd and I think pathetic to refer to him as a poodle. But it must be said that given the collapsing scenery in Washington now and in Baghdad as well, that there would be a very large number of people in the region who probably foolishly would refuse his good offices on this basis. And I think that's to be regretted, even as it has to be acknowledged.
Tony McNulty.
I think, as someone said, it would be a strange thing for Tony Blair to do at the behest of another government. I think it may well be something that he may want to do subsequent to his retirement, but in his own right or under some other international auspices. I think, to go back to the question directly, I don't think that all that he's done in 10 years, including things since the Iraq War, would necessarily mean that it would not be an appropriate area of the world for Tony Blair to spend some of his time after retirement. I don't see that follows. On the broader American point, I think, despite the way the Democrats have moved away from some aspects of the war, I think I'm right in saying there is still a significant body of support across the body politic in America for Tony Blair, but to do it, as Peter says, hitching on, there's no pun there, hitching on the tail end of an outgoing administration, I think would be rather strange.
Strange, and your advice to him would be what? Don't do it.
My immediate advice, and this isn't meant to be frivolous, would be to take a break after 10 years in the heat of things as Prime Minister and the 3 years before as leader, and really take stock. If the question is more general, and is the question, does Mr. Blair still have something to offer on the international stage, I think the answer is a profound yes.
Can I make a small point here? There's always an attempt to dignify this adventure as a crusade retrospectively by saying that oh no, of course you can't do that anymore. But it
wouldn't be to dignify it.
Well, that's your view. But
yes, it is. Who else's could it be?
The point that I would seek to make is this: the people who launched us onto this adventure, which has cost so many lives here and so many more in Iraq for precisely nothing, now like to say that they did it out of an idealistic desire to remove Saddam Hussein from office. Right up to a very late stage in this business, Mr. Blair was saying that Saddam Hussein could stay in office if only he relinquished the weapons of mass destruction, which he turned out not to have. There was no such intent. It's been invented afterwards. And they've all invented it afterwards to pretend that they had a noble motive. They didn't have a noble motive. They were just foolish.
Arrant nonsense. Let's come back to Tony Blair and whether, in the light of the Iraq War, he can be effective in the Middle East. Shirley Williams.
I think that Tony Blair is actually a considerable politician. I think it's just silly to pretend that he isn't. Having said that, I do agree that with Mr. Hitchens that certainly...
Which one? Two Hitchens here.
Well, I was trying to step out of the massive brotherly love that we're seeing around here. I think that there was a huge mistake, I agree with Christopher Hitchens, in the fact that Tony Blair did suggest that the weapons of mass destruction was the reason we went into Iraq. It never was, and I agree that probably it was invented as an excuse, sort of, because they intended to go into Iraq anyway, and my party, of course, opposed it from the very beginning. Having said that, I think the fact that Bush could suggest that Tony Blair should be an envoy to the Middle East shows how out of touch he is with the Middle East. I can think of something less likely to be successful than that. It's quite obvious.
If you say that you thought the weapons of mass destruction was invented, why did he say, as Pete Hitchens quoted, in the debate, I mean, just before the decision was made, that even at this 11th hour, Saddam could prevent an invasion?
I think it was quite clear that we had stuck to the argument about weapons of mass destruction, and we actually refused to allow the inspection to be completed that would have enabled him to say that there were no...
I remember, to be fair to Blair, and there's no particular reason to be fair to him, but I remember him making a very powerful and very passionate case for the removal of Saddam Hussein as a tyrant. I remember that being the single most persuasive thing in that debate on March the 18th, 2003.
As did President Bush in Iran.
And it was very powerful and very moving. And I actually think, funny enough, quite seriously, I think there is a bit of merit in using... when he recovers his strength from the holiday you want him to have, Tony, I think he should be sent out. I think Gordon Brown should appoint him our man in Baghdad.
You don't want to last long.
I'll tell you why. I'm quite serious about this, because it would show that when we went to war, we went to war not for oil, not for all the reasons that are attributed to the West, but because we wanted to alleviate the condition of the people of Iraq, and we wanted to improve their lives. And it'd be a fantastic display of his commitment to the project he embarked on if he were to go there.
Do you still think it was right, Boris, the war in Iraq?
Right. No, I think the whole thing's a disaster, but I think it was right to get rid of Saddam Hussein.
You were for it?
I was.
All right, let's hear from the member of the audience. The man in the blue shirt there, and then I come to you in the front. Yes.
Having been acknowledged as one of the chief architects of the invasion of Baghdad, how could he possibly have any credibility as a peace envoy?
I agree.
That's your view?
Yeah.
And you
a similar point in the sense that of all the main parties involved in this, how could he conceivably have been thought of as a peace envoy for the Middle East? The people involved. Only America would find Tony Blair acceptable. Not Europe, I don't think, certainly not Russia, and certainly not the people of the Middle East.
Do you agree with this, then?
I don't. That's simply not the case. He went on a tour of most of the capitals soon after what went on last summer and was greeted very, very warmly in each and every capital of all the major players around the Middle East region. I just simply don't think that's the case at all. And what's gone on in Baghdad and Iraq is almost shows the urgency, not least what's gone on in Gaza and everywhere since, of trying to find some resolution for, as he's described it and others, the greater Middle East region, Iraq all the way through to the Israel and Palestinian Authority.
What's he achieved in the course of his period in office to help the creation of a Palestinian state, of the two-state solution? What's he actually done that would qualify him to go back there now as an envoy that both sides would accept?
Much of it, as is the case in the Middle East, are small baby steps, but you have George Bush, the US president, and people forget this, now with his White House totally sold on a two-state solution. Even Clinton hadn't got to that stage. That is significant improvement.
Tony, it's terribly late. I mean, it's almost impossible now.
That's by the by. If we're discussing progress in the Middle East in proper historical terms, these are significant advances.
Mr. McNulty is righter even than he knows that George Bush is the first and only American president to have used the expression Palestinian state. Jimmy Carter never said it. Bill Clinton never said it. It had never been said by a president before.
Yes?
Slip of the tongue.
Well, probably not.
No, it was a response. It was the actual American response to the attack on New York on September the 11th, 2001, to actually declare themselves a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
That was their response.
The lady at the back there.
I don't mean to make this flippant, but I'm wondering why we're talking about a job for Tony Blair. Shouldn't he be looking at community service following his early release?
All right, then yes.
I just wonder whether Gordon Brown hasn't suggested this to try and keep Tony out of being President of Europe.
And you say yes in the brown T-shirt.
Not just an issue about Iraq, but also about Blair's bias for Israel. He protected Israel when it invaded Lebanon, and he stopped a ceasefire. He's regularly pressured Hamas. And didn't the UN envoy recently say that it was a direct result of the embargo on Hamas that has led to the situation that we're now facing in Gaza, where there's a civil war?
Well, with respect, everyone's blamed everybody in the whole Middle East for what's going on in Gaza, except Hamas. Christopher's very close friend, George Galloway, when asked, went through a litany of everyone who was to blame for it, except Hamas. If there has got to be people talking to each other, Fatah, Hamas certainly, getting back to the National Unity Government, and there has got to be development towards what everyone broadly agrees is a two-state solution. The fact that the first president, US president, actually accepts that, and hopefully that'll be built on subsequently, I think is a huge advance in an area where small steps and small advances
the US president
are so
has done nothing to stop the continuation of the building of settlements, nothing to suggest that the walls should be put back in an internationally acceptable...
all the settlements in Gaza.
I wish you'd let me finish just once in a while.
Don't stop, and then
All right,
you won't be
I'm
able to get
shouting.
in.
All right.
Being so self-pitying.
Okay, he did not...
Conversation.
When they tried to get the wall back to the internationally agreed line, which was accepted by the Israeli Supreme Court, he did not get the support of either the British Prime Minister or the American President, and the gentleman there is absolutely right. We allowed the Lebanon, southern Lebanon, to be laid flat, with no attempt to bring about a ceasefire, despite the desperate pleas of the Lebanese democratic government itself.
So Tony Blair has no standing, in your view?
Not in the Middle East. I said I thought he was a considerable politician. I do believe that.
All right, let's go on. Francis Benny, please.
Why did Gordon Brown offer Paddy Ashdown a seat in his cabinet?
This is the strange story today of what happened on Monday, Tuesday, where are we? Thursday now. Every hour something different happens. Boris Johnson, why do you think Gordon Brown offered Paddy Ashdown a seat in the cabinet?
Well, I feel very sorry for the Liberal Democrats because they've been absolutely ruthlessly tricked by Gordon. It's a standard thing that this new Prime Minister Blair did it himself with poor old Paddy Ashdown 10 years ago, didn't he? You dangle before them the prospect of red boxes and ministerial rovers and all the rest of it, and suddenly their eyes bug out and their tongues start lolling, and they see power, which of course they're very unlikely to taste under any other circumstances, and he lures them in with gently smiling, and he says, we will have a ministry of all the talents, and Paddy and Shirley, we're going to get you all in. But that never works. And then what happens is, of course, they agree to this, and then he ruthlessly, brutally exposes them.
He didn't agree to it. We said no.
Sorry, we're talking about Brown or Blair here?
We're talking about Paddy Ashdown.
Said no.
Are you talking about Brown or Blair?
He brutally exposes the fact that
no.
they've been involved in talks.
And Alex Carlisle said no.
And he then brutally exposes them as being willing to go in with a Labour government. And of course, it's greatly to the discredit of the poor old Liberal
Democrats. It's all untrue. It's a sort of Cameronian argument.
It's not. It's actually what happened. They were having long talks about a government of all the talents.
They were asked to... They invited Paddy, because he's a very able man, and he said no. They invited Alex Carlisle, because he's the terrorist expert, and he said no. So I don't know why you're saying we all said yes because we wanted ministerial cars, which incidentally are not that great a deal anyway. And I would add one more thing.
Were you approached?
No, of course I wasn't approached.
Would you have accepted had you been approached?
Why not? Would you have taken Tony's
Wait a minute, and you're a woman?
Yeah.
Is Gordon Brown anti-woman?
I'm not sure.
Has he offered?
I would have said that.
Wait a minute. No, but you said it very interesting. You said I wasn't approached. I'm too old, and I'm a woman.
Yes, well, the
You've held cabinet office in a Labour government before.
But Gordon Brown is not Jim Callaghan or Harold Wilson.
The point that Boris is missing is that Gordon Brown asked the wrong party. If you'd asked David Cameron, he'd be in there already with the red belt. So would he. They're desperate for it. They know they can't win an election. Just as much as the Liberal Democrats, they know they long for office. They've been busy trying on Labour Party clothes all for the past 2 years. Nonsense. Nonsense.
I'm not going to let you get away.
It's true.
Can you try and speak one at a time?
Who said he
Boris,
was the heir to Blair? Who said he was the heir to Blair? Mr. Cameron. Who tried to say he was the heir to Blair? Mr. Osborne.
He's going to take over from Blair in due course, as soon as Gordon Brown has the guts to call an election.
All right,
they should have asked Cameron.
Let's break this up. Yes, the man up there said, you.
Isn't one of the central points here that next week we're going to get a Prime Minister that we didn't vote for, and we're also going to get a Prime Minister now that it's been revealed wants us to have a cabinet of MPs that we didn't even vote into government. I mean, it's patently ridiculous, isn't it?
Tony McNulty.
Well, the second point isn't true at all, because as far as I understand it, no Liberal Democrat MPs were approached at all. It was just people in the House of Lords.
Hang on. Ming Campbell is... Ming Campbell.
I don't think anyone was offered Campbell.
What do you think? Wait a minute. What do you think went on between Gordon Brown and Ming Campbell?
I'm not party to what's gone on between them.
The job was offered to Shirley.
Well, maybe so. I should discover that or otherwise...
What's going on?
I should discover that or otherwise next week.
You're a staunch Labour supporter. What's happening?
I'm convinced what Gordon is doing is as Shirley says, rather than Liberal Democrat. It's about approaching someone like Ashdown, who has served and served his country well. He's done the Parades Commission in Northern Ireland. He's done, by all accounts and by popular acclaim, a fine job in the Balkans since he left the House of Commons. And I think it's a sign of real confidence from the new Prime Minister that he's looking beyond simply his own party to secure talents in the interest of the country. Whether at cabinet level or otherwise, I think is totally irrelevant. No, it's far from desperation. I think it's a sign of very, very strong confidence in himself, his party, and his government. I think the other small point to make is that of the others offered, again, they've made significant contributions. I think Alex Carlisle, who I work with now, he's the terrorism legislation reviewer, has done, again, an exceptional job, never always agreeing with us. And if his talents...
But you'd like to see the Liberal Democrats in government?
I didn't say that necessarily. I'm just trying to explain to you what I think Gordon is doing in exploring a whole range of options before he puts his cabinet in place after Wednesday.
It's the wrong way...
And again, the other point I'd make, to go back to the gentleman, there have been any number of times, 3 at least, I think, where there has been changes in the leadership without a subsequent election other than at the appropriate time. We do not have a presidency. We did not elect Tony Blair as Prime Minister.
Yeah, but he said he would serve
Sufficient people elected the
He
Labour
said he would
Party,
serve a full
and
5
he was our
years.
leader.
All right, the man there...
Thatcher Major was exactly the same. Callaghan Wilson was exactly the same.
Yes. All right. Panel, listen to the audience for a moment. Curb your enthusiasm. Yes, sir.
Yes, says the grumpy old man.
Yes.
Is Gordon Brown actually preparing for a coalition government in the next election? Is he not doing that?
I don't think so at all. It's not for us to preempt the result of the next election. He's certainly not preparing for a coalition government next week. He's gone to, as ever, very, very nicely, Boris has been utterly partisan. He's gone to individuals who happen to be Liberal Democrats.
Oh, I see.
He hasn't gone to the Lib Democrats saying, come on down.
That wouldn't be the leader of the
Not you, Boris, you, sir.
Simply the case that Gordon Brown hasn't got enough talent in his own party to choose from?
That's not the case either. Right. It's a sign, I think, of true confidence.
Mr. Hitchens, you've been silent through this domestic argument.
It's brand new politics.
I don't care about the Liberal Democratic Party at all. It bores me stiff. But do we know that Paddy Ashdown is still a supporter of this ramshackle, itself cobbled together coalition of a party? Are we clear that he is still a member of it? I'm not. Has anyone asked him?
Can I just add to this? And I think there's one serious problem about this. I think Gordon Brown perfectly legitimately has gone about cherry-picking leading Liberal Democrats. I think the problem is there are seriously some issues where we ought to try to get an all-party approach. One of them is terrorism, in my view. No, I wasn't jumping at you, Tony. I'm just trying to make... I was just trying to make a serious point. I think terrorism, I think climate change, and I think the issue of how much...
Why did you guys pull out of our agreement on climate change?
Or the final set of issues, which are to do with the balance between terrorism and civil liberty, are ones which actually ought to be looked at by all the parties. I think the Conservatives should be invited as well, because I think unless we get out of some of the political partisan battles, we will never get serious answers to long-term problems which are likely to be central to the destination of this country.
Your wish is coming true. All these three representatives of supposedly different parties are fundamentally the same. The Tories are working very hard at the moment to try and recruit Labour front-bench spokesmen and Labour spin doctors and other Labour people. They've actually failed so far, not because you know who, not because they're not left-wing enough.
Come on, tell us. Who are we trying to recruit?
Name that spin doctor.
Who are you trying to recruit?
Yeah.
An education spokesman. I think I'll go no further than that. You failed, and it was part of your policy for grammar schools.
Are you mystified, Boris Johnson? You're an education
He's not mystified at all. He knows who I mean.
The parties... Adonis. You mean Adonis?
Yes.
Did you say Adonis?
Come on.
Is that the name? They are all interchangeable, and they all exclude most of what most people think from what they've read.
All right. I want to go to our audience just quickly. 3 points. You, sir, first, and then you, and then you. Yes.
Yeah,
just make your point, if you would.
I think if they're so interchangeable, it seems ridiculous to me that when sort of the olive branch is basically held out to someone from across the party political divide, Paddy Ashdown basically refused it out of hand. It seems to me like complete tribalism.
No, not really, because I think Paddy Ashdown was absolutely right in the sense that what's at stake for the Liberal Democrats isn't just whether somebody becomes a cabinet minister. Frankly, individual cabinet ministers have very little influence, whatever people believe. What's at stake? Just a minute. What's at stake for us is to do with devolution, is to do with local government, is to do with civil liberties. And I think that anybody who went across them simply without knowing where the position of the new government was going to be on these things, then accepted a cabinet position, would be regarded as selling out.
I promised you I'd bring you in. Just 2
in.
points. You two side by side, if you would. Be quick if you would, because we must go on. You go first.
I think any Liberal Democrat would be a dang fool to refuse a job in Brown's cabinet. Labour is the only party of substance, and any opportunity to be aligned with that would be a good thing, would bring some credibility to your party.
OK. And you, sir?
I think it's an indication of the failure of party politics, that effectively the majority of the electorate are disenfranchised, and we just do not have the people of quality in Parliament being selected.
OK. We must go on, please. Nigel Jones.
In one of his last desperate acts as Prime Minister, will Tony Blair sign the EU Reform Treaty and sell Britain down the river?
In his last desperate act, one of his last desperate acts as Prime Minister, will Tony Blair sign the EU Reform Treaty and sell Britain down the river? Peter Hitchens.
Well, it's already so far down the river, I don't know whether there's very much left to be sold. Well, I don't know. I think that he would like to, and he has longed to since he came into office, for instance, he was very, very anxious to abolish the pound and take us into the euro and so abolish our economic independence, which is one of the few things which remains to us. And almost all the political class would like to continue with this process of ever closer union, which we agreed to in 1972 and which our political class have lied about ever since by claiming that this was a common market, it was all economic, it had nothing to do with politics. And they continue to lie to us.
What do the four red lines mean in that case? The four red lines
they mean hold on to the salami slicer for a moment because we're in political difficulty at home. They mean just for now can you lay off because it's not a good time, but come back later in another form and we'll give it to you. That's the way it goes. Each time we have one of these conferences, we lose a little more. And we find that suddenly we can't control another part of what we do. Quite a lot of acts of Parliament, the Disability Discrimination Act recently, the Data Protection Act, are actually European Commission directives, simply rewritten and then put through Parliament. I think Boris will confirm that about 80% of the legislation that goes through our Parliament actually originates in Brussels. And that is the state we're already in. We are a subject province of a European superstate with a few remaining tiny little areas of independence which we just about preserve. There's not much left to go. And if this conference doesn't get rid of it, another one will. If you don't like it, the only thing to do is to leave. But none of these people will say so. They're not interested in national independence or liberty or anything important. They're interested in being in the political class.
Tony McNulty.
To go back to the question, rather than Peter's little knee-jerk, well, we better do the anti-EU rant here now because the programme's come to a close. I don't think he will sell the UK down the river. I think the discussions, as laid out in the press up to now, the discussions with Gordon Brown have been very, very strong, probably one of the strongest set of conditions going into a council. And I don't think we'll get the European Constitution by the back door. Certainly in my own area, Judicial and Home Affairs, we are very, very strong. We are not about to go to qualified majority vote in, yes, cooperation on police, on terror and things like that, but not the cessation of power over to Brussels. So we'll see what happens over the next couple of days, but I am strongly convinced that there will not be, as you suggested in your question, some deal that sails the country down the river.
Okay. Christopher Hitchens.
It seems to me somewhat preposterous to say that if you join a common currency, you lose your economic independence. Has France lost its economic independence? Has Germany lost its economic independence? Has Ireland, where I was at the weekend, lost its independence? What economic independence did it have when it had the punt, for example? How does that make you economically independent? It seems to me to be nonsensical.
But what about this treaty that's being negotiated now?
I have no idea.
Right?
As Maynard Keynes put it, he who controls the currency controls the country. It's very simple. If you don't control your interest rates in your central bank, you don't control your country.
You, sir.
Aren't the red line is just a load of spin to prevent in his desperation to avoid a referendum?
Shirley Williams?
I probably disagree with everybody once again. First of all, I say directly that I think if we're going to actually deal with some of the hugest issues facing us, we can't do it entirely on our own. I find it rather strange that we've got all this conversation about selling our sovereignty down the river. A long time ago, we went a very long way to sell our sovereignty to the United States. That's where we made defence agreements. That's where we agreed that the dollar has for years and years determined effectively British interest rates on the level of the British pound, much more than the euro has done, because we're not, it's no good saying cobblers, it's absolutely true. We had a huge loan from the United States, which we took. It put us into very considerable dependence on them. And if you don't believe that, then you have to explain our position on the Iraq War, our position on Afghanistan, our position on thing after thing. Now, I admire the United States. I lived there for many years, but it isn't any good pretending that we're in some peculiar way selling our national independence to the European Union. Incidentally, the very measure that it should be most admired by Peter Hitchens, which was the creation of the single European market, was effectively the creation of Mrs. Thatcher, who agreed to more qualified majority voting in the European Union than anything or any minister has since.
That was the deal.
That's just true.
That was the deal. That was the deal. And she fell into that trap.
Deal.
She gave away the sovereignty. Look, national sovereignty is about things like having greengrocers prosecuted for selling bananas by the pound. That's when you discover that somebody else is running your own country.
I thought they decided not to do that.
They did it, and they will do it again.
They won't do it again.
Yeah. I think a referendum is well overdue. We were promised one. We haven't had one. We're hearing lots of excuses. And it's about time that the country had a referendum. We had the healthiness of a national public debate instead of the politicians squabbling over it. Let's have a referendum.
Boris Johnson,
you're completely right. You're completely right, and one thing is for ding-dang sure, Gordon Brown will not deliver it.
When do you want this referendum?
Let me tell you in a minute, there will be an agreement in Brussels on the new treaty. It will resemble the Constitution in virtually every particular, except they will have abstracted some of the more obviously ludicrous things, such as the European anthem and the flag and all the rest of it. Not all children will have to sing the Ode to Joy and all the rest of it. That will be taken out, but the essence of it will be there. The thing will have legal personality. The Charter of Fundamental Rights will be installed. There will be a creation of a European foreign minister and all the rest of it. And I think the abolition of the rotating presidency, which I think is a great shame, because all these measures strip away the rhetoric and the jargon. All these measures basically amount, step by step, to a centralisation of power and authority in the EU institutions.
I think we're long overdue.
You even started. We are long overdue a national discussion about whether we think that is right. I think we should have a referendum.
Boris, if I can stop your flow for a moment, Boris. Which is the only party that has given us a referendum?
The first party to promise a referendum on the euro was of course the Conservative Party.
To give one.
Not promise.
There wasn't one on Maastricht. There wasn't one on the Single European Act.
I think the gentleman is completely right. We are long overdue a national debate
when was
about
the last one, Boris? It was in 1975.
It was in 1975, which is too long ago.
Christopher Hitchens.
And it's about time we had another.
The Conservatives were in for 18 years after that. They never had a single one. Not one.
That's no argument for not having one now.
Christopher Hitchens.
I just wanted to say I slightly regretted the flippancy of my last reply. I live in Washington, and I can't always keep up with all the arcana of the European Union integration talks, but a reason to regret the departure of Tony Blair as Prime Minister, in my opinion, is this. For the last 10 years, for the first time ever, we've had a Prime Minister who hasn't been either much too pro-European, fanatically so, or too pro-American. Someone who's at home in Washington, at home in Italy, can speak French, can go and talk in Ireland without any apparent strain. Under the Labour government, of which actually Shirley Williams was a member, most conspicuously, we really did grovel to the United States, most shamefully in the case of Vietnam, the disgraceful government of which she was an ornament then. Edward Heath couldn't give a damn about Washington, could only think about Brussels. It's gone on like that. Everyone will have their favourite example. I think we'll begin to notice, only when it's over, that we had a Prime Minister who was easy in his skin in both dimensions. Okay.
let's. I want to move on, Shirley, if I may. Let's take a question from Tom Hawksley,